ATM. So this will be video 7 of the Senate torture report. I know it has a different name. Let me go back over here really quick. Well, of course, now I didn't want to open. Let me see. Report name. Give me a second. Let me go to my gallery. It's a long one, so that's why I have to open it up. Okay, so it's the report of the Select Committee on Intelligence Committee study of the Central Intelligence Agency's detention and interrogation program. So, of course, after 9/11, all this terrorists and the sympathizers or whatever people were sent to basically like Guantanamo Bay, and then the CIA took care of it from there. You get it? Anyway, let's go on. Let's get back over here. So we're starting right here on October 8th, 2001. DCI George Tenet delegated the management and oversight of the capture and retention authorities provided by the MON to the CIA's Deputy Director of Operations, James Pavitt, and the CIA's Chief of the Counterterrorism Center, Cofer Black. The DCI also directed that all requests and approvals for capture and detention be documented in writing. On December 17th, 2001, however, the DDO rescinded these requirements and issued via a CIA cable blanket approval for CIA officers in blank to determine who poses the requisite continuing serious threat of violence or death to U.S. persons and interests, or who are planning terrorist activities. By March 2002, CIA headquarters had expanded the authority beyond the language of the MON and instructed CIA personnel that it will be appropriate to detain individuals who might not be high-value targets in their own right, but could provide information on high-value targets. On April 7, 2003, redacted, CTC legal, redacted, sent a cable to CIA stations and bases stating that at this stage in the war, we believe there is sufficient opportunity in advance to document the key aspects of many, if not most, of our capture and detain operations. Redacted cable also provided guidance as to who could be detained under the MON, stating there must be an articulable basis on which to conclude that the actions of a specific person whom we propose to capture and or detain pose a continuing serious threat of violence or death to U.S. persons or interests, or that the person is planning a terrorist activity. We are not permitted to detain someone merely upon a suspicion that he or she has valuable information about terrorist or planned acts of terrorism. Similarly, the mere membership in a particular group or the mere existence of a particular familial tie does not necessarily connote that the threshold of continuing serious threat has been identified. And then there's a bunch of footnotes if you want to read those. Okay. The CIA holds at least 21 more detainees than it has represented. At least 26 CIA detainees wrongfully detained, while the CIA has represented in public and classified settings that it detained fewer than 100 individuals. The committee's review of CIA records indicates that the total number of CIA detainees were at least 119. Internal CIA documents indicate that inadequate record keeping made it impossible for the CIA to determine how many individuals it has detained. In December 2003, a CIA station overseeing CIA detention operations in country informed CIA headquarters that it made the unsettling discovery that the CIA was holding a number of detainees about whom it knew very little. Nearly 5 years later, in late 2008, the CIA attempted to determine how many individuals the CIA had detained. At the completion of the review, CIA leaders, including CIA Director Michael Hayden were informed that the review found that the CIA had detained at least 112 individuals and possibly more, according to an email summarizing the meeting. CIA Director Hayden, and there's a bunch of footnotes here. I'm not going to read all that. Okay, instructed a CIA officer to devise a way to keep the number of CIA detainees at the same number the CIA had previously briefed to Congress. The email, which the briefer sent only to himself, stated, I briefed the additional CIA detainees that could be included in RDI numbers. DCIA instructed me to keep the detained number at 98. Pick whatever date I needed to make that happen, but the number is 98. While the CIA acknowledged to the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence in February 2006 that it had wrongly detained five individuals throughout the course of its detention program, a review of CIA records, more footnotes if you want to read it, that at least 21 individuals, or a total of 26 of the 119, 22% CIA detainees identified in the study, did not meet the MON standard for detention. This is a conservative calculation and includes only CIA detainees whom the CIA itself determined did not meet the standard for detention. It does not include individuals about whom there was internal disagreements within the CIA over whether the detainee met the standard or not, or the numerous detainees who, following their detention and interrogation, were found not to pose a continuing threat of violence or death to U.S. persons or interests, or to be planning terrorist activities as required by the September 17th, 2001 MON, with one known exception. There are no CIA, most of this is redacted. Hold on, this is like a whole page full of stuff. Records to indicate that the CIA held personnel accountable for the detention of individuals the CIA itself determined were wrongfully detained. On or at least 4 occasions, the CIA used host country detention sites in country to detain individuals on behalf of the CIA who did not meet the MON standard for capture and detention. Alex Station officers at CIA headquarters explicitly acknowledged that these detainees did not meet the MON standard for detention and recommended placing the individuals in host country detention facilities because they did not meet the standard. The host country had no independent reason to detain these individuals and held them solely at the behest of the CIA. The detention of Abu Zubaydah and the development and authorization of the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques. Past experience led the CIA to assess that coercive interrogation techniques were counterproductive and ineffective. After issuance of the MON, CIA attorneys researched possible legal defense for using techniques considered torture. The CIA conducts no research on effective interrogations, relies on contractors with no relevant experience. At the time of the issuance of the September 17th, 2001 MON, which is noted did not reference interrogation techniques, the CIA had in place long-standing formal standards for conducting interrogations. The CIA had shared these standards with this is footnotes. Okay, with the committee. In January 1989, the CIA informed the committee that inhumane physical or psychological techniques are counterproductive because they do not produce intelligence and will probably result in false answers. Testimony of the CIA Deputy Director of Operations in 1988 denounced coercive interrogation techniques, stating physical abuse or other degrading treatment was rejected not only because it's wrong, but because it has historically proven to be ineffective. By October 2001, CIA policy was to comply with the Department of the Army Field Manual, Intelligence Interrogation. A CIA Directorate of Operations Handbook from October 2001 states that the CIA does not engage in human rights violations, which it defined as torture, cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment or punishment, or prolonged detention without charges or trial. The handbook further stated that it is CIA policy to neither participate directly in nor encourage interrogation, which involves the use of force, mental or physical torture, extremely demeaning indignities, or exposure to inhumane treatment of any kind as an aid to interrogation. The CIA did not, however, have historical experience using coercive forms of interrogation. In 1963, the CIA produced a QBARC counterintelligence interrogation manual intended as a manual for Cold War interrogations, which included the principal coercive techniques of interrogation, so arrest, detention, deprivation of sensory stimuli through solitary confinement or similar methods, threats and fear, debility, pain, heightened suggestibility and hypnosis, narcosis, and induced regression. In 1978, DCI Stansfield Turner asked former CIA officer John Lyman Hart to investigate the CIA interrogation of Soviet KGB officer Yuri Nisenko using the QBARC methods to include sensory deprivation techniques and forced standing. In Hart's testimony before the House Select Committee on Assassinations on September 15, 1978, he noted that in his 31 years of government service, it has never fallen to my lot to be involved with any experience as unpleasant in every possible way as first, the investigation of this case, and second, the necessity of lecturing upon it and testifying. To me, it is an abomination, and I'm happy to say that it is not in my memory typical of what my colleagues and I did in the agency during the time I connected with it. Notwithstanding the Hart investigation findings, just 5 years later in 1983, a CIA officer incorporated significant portions of the QBARC manual into the Human Resources Exploitation Training Manual, which the same officer used to provide interrogation training in Latin America in the early 1980s, and which was used to provide interrogation training to the redacted in 1980 something. CIA officer redacted was involved in the HRE training and conducted interrogations. The CIA Inspector General later recommended that he be orally admonished for inappropriate use of interrogation techniques. In the fall of 2002, redacted became the CIA's chief of interrogations in the CIA's renditions group and the officer in charge of CIA interrogations. Despite the CIA's previous statements that coercive physical and psychological interrogations techniques result in false answers and have proven to be ineffective, as well as the aforementioned early November 2001 determination that specific methods of interrogation would be permissible so long as they generally comport with commonly accepted practices deemed useful by lawful by U.S. courts. By the end of November 2001, CIA officers had begun researching potential legal defenses for using interrogation techniques that were considered torture by foreign governments and a non-governmental organization. On November 26, 2001, attorneys in the CIA's Office of General Counsel circulated a draft legal memorandum describing the criminal prohibition on torture and potential novel legal defense for CIA officers who engaged in torture. The memorandum stated that the CIA could argue that the torture was necessary to prevent imminent, significant physical harm to persons where there is no other available means to prevent the harm, adding that states may be very unwilling to call the U.S. to task for torture when it resulted in saving thousands of lives. There's all that footnote. Okay. And then in August 1st, 2002, OLC memorandum to the White House Counsel includes a similar analysis of the necessity defense in response to potential charges of torture. In January 2002, the National Security Council principals began to debate whether to apply the protections of the Geneva Convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war of August 12th of 1949 in Geneva to the conflict with Al Qaeda and the Taliban. A letter drafted for DCI Tenet to the president urged that the CIA be exempt from any application of these protections, arguing the application of Geneva would significantly hamper the ability of CIA to obtain critical threat information necessary to save American lives. On February 1st, 2002, approximately 2 months prior to the detention of the CIA's first detainee, a CIA attorney wrote that if the CIA detainees were covered by Geneva, there would be a few alternatives to simply asking questions. The attorney concluded that if that were the case, then the optic becomes how legally defensible is a particular act that probably violates the convention, but ultimately saves lives. On February 7, 2002, President Bush issued a memorandum stating that neither Al Qaeda nor Taliban detainees qualified as prisoners of war under Geneva, and that Common Article 3 of Geneva, requiring humane treatment of individuals in a conflict, did not apply to Al Qaeda or Taliban detainees. From the issuance of the MON to early 2002, there are no indications in CIA records that the CIA conducted significant research to identify effective interrogation practices, such as conferring with experienced U.S. military or law enforcement interrogators, or with the intelligence, military, or law enforcement services of other countries with the experience in counterterrorism and the interrogation of terrorist suspects, nor are there CIA records referencing any review of the CIA's past use of coercive interrogation techniques and associated lessons learned. The only research documented in CIA records during this time on the issue of interrogation was the preparation of a report on an Al Qaeda manual that was initially assessed by the CIA to include strategies to resist interrogation. This report was commissioned by the CIA's Office of the Technical Services and drafted by two CIA contractors, Dr. Grayson Swigert and Dr. Hammond Dunbar. All right, I'm going to stop right here because I'm getting tired and whatever. I've done a lot of talking today, so now I need to do some reading on some other stuff. But anyway, I'll talk to y'all later. Have a good afternoon. See y'all tomorrow.